In this video, I'm going to show you how you can properly export your models from Zbrush. So you can see that I have the item that I would like to export all merged into one subtool, though I do have a bunch of different polygroups going on here, and they are not all dynameshed. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to need to do is make sure that we polygroup this as one item. So we can hit Control W to assign the same polygroup to our entire visible object. And then we're going to go to the Dynamesh menu. And let's find Dynamesh. And we are going to run the Dynamesh, so you should probably know what your approximate resolution level was. I'm just going to try this at about 1700. Let's see what that gives us. All right, not too bad. All right, so Dynamesh has completed its operation. We now have one cohesive mesh. At this stage here, what I would recommend you do is just make sure that you look over your model, and you can turn polyframe off for this. If there's any weird gaps going on that you would like to fill, so for example, I would be looking at this hand here and seeing, I have a little bit of a cavity going on between this finger here. Now, this is not going to be an area of detail that's super important. So in this case, I might use something like the move brush, and then just turn on back face masking with the move brush, and that's going to allow you to come in here and just kind of pull this mesh down and close that gap. I would try my best to not distort it, but you can see here how this finger is not fully touching the blade. So maybe we take this here and we just nudge it down a little bit. Again, this change in detail is not going to be super noticeable, but it is going to make our model just a little bit more secure. So at least I have contact here. This little gap probably won't be an issue, but I would just make sure to take a look at that type of stuff. All right, I don't think there's going to be any other problematic areas on this particular weapon. So we can go ahead and just re-dynamesh this. And I can actually probably select something a bit lower than that because I don't think I need it to be 7 million polygons. All right. So now what we're going to do is we need to decimate this, because having a large poly count like this is overkill, and it's going to make any sort of repair process that you try to do in your mesh fixer, it's going to make it take forever. And you also just don't want to overload it with having that many triangles. So we're going to be going to the Z plugin menu. I'm just going to open up my sidebar here. We're going to go to Z plugin and then drag this over. And then we're going to select Decimation Master. Now, Decimation Master, usually what you would do is you need to pre-process your mesh. So it's going to kind of look over the mesh, analyze it, and figure out how many polygons it contains. And then you can go ahead and choose, the percentage of that you want to decimate it to. So you could go down to, again, the suggested 20% here. You could go down to 10% or whatever it is that you want. Okay. You can also just put it to a specified point, like if you want to decimate it down to 200k polys, that's going to be your end amount of polygons left on this. So what you want to consider here is you want to pick a high enough polygon count that it's going to not distort any of your detail, but you want it to be as light as possible. Right? So you don't want to have an overly dense mesh for no reason. You just want to be conscious of how that decimation is affecting your details. So I would say that for the most part, most of the things that you're going to be doing at a smaller scale are going to be perfectly fine being between 75k and 250k polygons. So technically you can just use these preset values, and then you don't even have to worry about going through pre-process and all that stuff. This is just a one button click that's going to do all of that stuff for you. So if you have a very high polygon count, I would recommend with just starting at 250 and observe what that does. And then if it looks fine and you want to try going lower, you can just click on the 150 or the 75 and then see what that does. So let's start out with the 250. And you can see that it's just analyzing our mesh currently. And because it is such a large and dense mesh, it's going to take a little bit of time. So just wait for that bar to complete there. All right, so you can see that our active points now has changed to 250,000. So let's take a look at what our mesh looks like and if we've lost any fidelity in it. So let's just turn on polyframe here. And so you can see what Decimation Master does is it's going to try and use large triangles in any areas where there's flat spots and you don't need a lot of detail. And then closer to your edges, that's where it's going to start using these smaller triangles to make sure that you do have enough detail to make that transition. So again, you don't want to have these triangles be overly visible, right? So when I'm looking at the surface, I don't want to see any obvious triangles, which honestly I'm not, and I'm zoomed in very close here. The size that this is going to get printed at is nowhere near this big, right? So none of that is going to be noticeable. We could try and go down even further, so I'm just going to click on the 150K and see how that affects things. And you can see, zooming in here, I don't really see much of a noticeable difference. Right, we can even Control Z that and see if that looks any different, and it really doesn't, right? So we could leave it at 150K here, or we could keep it at 250K. Either of those are fine, but try not to go above the 250K for any of your models. None of the models you create here are going to need more detail than that. All right, so after decimation has been completed, we're going to now go to the 3D Print Hub. And the first thing you want to do here is make sure that you update your size ratio. So this is going to tell you the size of your model, but always click on this because this is always going to remember the last model that you did this with. So click on update size ratios and it's going to tell you to select the measurement that best fits your object. So this one here is, I know that it's 84 millimeters long and it's 17 millimeters wide. So we're going to make sure that we click on this one here. That's the one that best describes it. Make sure to pay attention to the measurement unit there. All right, so we've got that set up. Our size ratios are updated. The next thing we'll look at is our export options. So normally it's going to be set to visible subtools. And in that case, it might be fine if it's the only subtool that you have visible. That's all it's going to export. Though if you wanted to export multiple models, what you could do is just make those other models visible too. So you could have as many models as you want on screen and they would all get exported if you choose that option. If you want to export one thing at a time, then you're going to click on the selected option, and that's going to make sure that it only exports the thing that you select. Now, given the size ratios things that I mentioned earlier, if you do have multiple models, it just matters that your currently selected one is updated to the correct size ratios for that model, and it will, apply those same measurements to the other ones as they look visually compared to this one. All right, but we've only got the one here, so we're going to click on selected, and then we're going to go and export to STL. And we're just going to put this into the downloads, and we can, check, we can rename this to whatever we want and hit save. And then you should have a nicely exported model. Okay, so be sure to check the size of your model once it's been exported, just to make sure that it is actually been decimated. So if you have any models that are, approaching gigabytes, you probably did not do your decimation properly. So check this number, the active points, and then also check your file size after it's been exported to make sure that it's not crazy big. Okay, but that's all there is to exporting. So make sure you get that properly done before you move into supporting your model for printing.